I would find one platform that has really good built-in distribution and that algorithm is made for discovery. And I would go in on that and I would basically ignore everything else. And I'd have a funnel back to email.
Nathan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've been a fan of all your content, so it's good to chat.
Yeah, likewise. It's always fun to connect in person. I've been doing a lot of digging with kind of your journey to starting ConvertKit and really starting this mission that it looks like you're on to help creators all over the world.
Yeah. My background, at a high level is in software design. So I did web design in high school, like freelance, all of that, and then dove into learning software design, got into the iOS world when the iPad came out, worked for a startup that was doing iOS design. And my first projects that actually made money were iOS apps. Like I had a Habits app, I had a flashcards app, I had an app used by speech language pathologists actually, which was kind of interesting. So dove into that world, did freelancing, and then that took me into the world of blogging and content creation and down the whole email path. And we can get into any aspects of that you want to talk about.
Who taught you design? Are you self-taught or is that something that you had to learn?
I don't want to say self-taught. It's the way that we learn anything on the internet. You come across, like on one hand, people are like, oh, you were self-taught. And I guess the way that I think about it is my teachers just never knew me. I knew them really well.
Yeah.
In like the early days of the web standards movement or things like that, there's just so many great blogs of people being like, hey, I figured out how to do this with CSS. I figured out how, this other thing. And they would just write about it. And so I just consumed all of that content and then practiced a lot. I did go to school for graphic design. Yeah. I lasted one semester in the art department.
Yeah.
And then I lasted 3 more semesters in like the business department for marketing. And then after 2 years, I was out. So I couldn't do it.
Okay. So you blog, you design, and then you kind of got the impetus that you were going to put it all together and you started ConvertKit. What was the original idea for ConvertKit? And is that kind of the ConvertKit that we know today?
Yeah. So I had gone on this path from quitting my job. I spent 3 years at a startup doing software design, and then quit my job to go freelance, and had some iOS apps that were making some money, and then freelance design. And in that process, I was following people through Tim Ferriss. I'd come across a guy named Chris Guillebeau. He'd written a lot about self-publishing and content creation, and I loved his stuff. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to self-publish a book on designing iOS apps. And there wasn't a lot of content about it. This is in 2012. So iOS had been out for a few years, but was still in the early days. And I just figured, I don't have an audience or anything, but if I write the book on how to design iOS apps, then you're going to want to hire me to design your app. It's going to be good for getting a lot more business. I can charge more. And my goal was to make $10,000 off of the book in its whole lifetime. I'm not giving it away for free. I want to sell it and I want it to be a business. But I ended up launching it in September 2012 to an email list of 800 people that I built on MailChimp. And I sold $12,000 worth of the book in the first day. And so I was like, this is amazing. By the end of the first week, it sold $19,000 and I was off to the races. And so I actually never took on another design client. That whole path didn't materialize. There were plenty of options. I was just like, no, I'm all in on, selling digital products and building an audience. I ended up writing another book. We can get into why if it's interesting, but I wrote a book on designing web applications. That one made $50,000 in the first month. And I would go around, there's a friend. So I live in Boise and there's not like a huge startup scene in Boise, but there's a lot of like really talented online marketers who have been at it since the early days. So if you know companies like bodybuilding.com and ClickBank, and even more recently like ClickFunnels and plenty of others that are like, they're all founded in Boise. And so there's just these people who like understand search since the early days, or like the guy who built about.com, who like scaled all of their search rankings. If you remember back in like 2004 to 2008, when they ranked for just absolutely everything.
Okay.
Like he's a friend who lives here in Boise. So there's like this quiet, like OG internet marketer community here. And talking to this one guy, a friend of mine named Ron, and he's like, hey, or this is what I was saying. I was like, I'm selling this book, and I thought Twitter and Facebook and, Instagram was new at the time. Like, this is where all the sales would come from. And they're all coming from email. And he's giving me this look. He's like, yeah, we've known that since 2000. Like, what do you want? Like a gold star? Like, you're going here and just saying, I don't know if I like came into the real estate community and started telling you like all the most obvious things.
Yeah.
You'd be like, yes.
You're like, use a loan to buy real estate.
Yeah, exactly. And so anyway, like that was a new fantastic discovery for me. And I was like, does everybody know this? So I just started diving in of like, okay, what are all the best practices? How do you grow your list the fastest? What automations should you set up? What incentives should you give away? All of these things. How should you have like guest posts to get traction back to your site? All of this. And I did it all in MailChimp and just found that the process was pretty painful of like, I'd come up with some best practice or learn it and try to implement it. And I'd write all this custom code. And it's like, okay, this doesn't make sense. And so in this journey to go from content creation to, I wanted to get back into building software. Then I decided that, okay, the next thing I'm going to build is an email product, MailChimp, but for me, for content creators. And so that's how it started in January 2013.
And did this happen before or after? So when I was doing some digging, you have a quote. You said, Jason Fried of Basecamp taught me that making money is a skill, just like playing an instrument or learning to create. Had that already happened? And I'm just really curious, like, what did he tell you? Like, what was his version of like how you make money? Do you remember?
Yeah. So he talks about it. He actually has a couple of public talks, I think, about this, where he talks about in the early days of his career, working at, I think, a sporting goods store and like selling shoes and the skills that go into that and things that you learn. So it wasn't like he sat me down and taught me this individually, but he's, and I have this list of like web design mentors and app design mentors, and Jason would be, in that list of business mentors who just consumed absolutely every piece of content that Jason and all these other guys put out. I'm not sure the timing of when I learned that, but I was super interested in making money. And I always thought, so I grew up in a family where money was very, very scarce. And so, I thought that money came down to luck or maybe career choice. Like I had an uncle who was a doctor who made, he was the wealthiest person that I, had that I knew of. And thankfully, even him was very good with money. Like I remember, in 2005, he was driving a 20-year-old Saturn or something like that. So like, not like the doctor who is all loans and all that. He was a fantastic financial role model. When I started to learn following like the content creators like Tim Ferriss and Chris Guillebeau, and then business operators like Jason Fried and others. And they're talking about like the set of skills that you can learn. And I was like, oh, okay. Wait, sales is a skill, copywriting is a skill, all of these things in the same way that accounting or these other things I started learning in school were. Then I was like, wait, I'm just going to get really, really good at all of these skills. And that's basically what it turned into before ConvertKit, or around the time I was starting ConvertKit. I got to the point where I was making $200,000 to $250,000 a year selling digital products, to my audience. And it was just like, okay, I think I've got this figured out. Now, how do we productize it and make it easier for other people?
There's now over 50,000 folks that have, I guess that would be a newsletter on ConvertKit. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yeah. So that's the total, free accounts. And there's 45,000 people, like active customers paying for ConvertKit.
Okay. Why? Okay. You just said a second ago, you said, well, email was obvious to everybody that was already in marketing. And I feel like we're having this, maybe it's me because I'm a little bit further removed from the conversation, but I feel like we're having this resurgence where everybody's starting to wake up again and go, there's been all this innovation over the last decade, and email is really where it all is at. Why is that?
Why are people coming back to email, do you think?
Or like why has email always I think it was always dominant throughout it, but I think there was this narrative for all these years that it was going to go away and there was going to be all these other things. And then we've kind of learned a lot of lessons, and now we're back to, okay, this really is the thing. Right.
Email's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. And so its greatest strength is that you can have this direct connection with individuals who in a piece of real estate that they highly value, right? If you think about in my email inbox, the things next to it are the contract that I need to sign, the email I got, from my uncle saying, hey, are we doing that family vacation here? Because if so, I need to plan to book it. Like there's a lot of high value things in there. And I've set up filters so that a lot of the low value stuff doesn't end up in there. And then, so that's one very positive side. Compare that to say, Twitter or Instagram, where, any content that I put out, who knows what it's next to. My tweet might be next to someone, talking about sports. It might be next to an ad about any content. I don't know. Like the signal to noise ratio is way higher on email, generally speaking, than it is on the social networks. So that's the upside. The downside is that the social networks are really good at discovery, of saying, here's an algorithm that we know what you want to see. And so we're going to feed you more of that, or at least we're going to try. And that's why like TikTok has taken off like crazy, is because they have a very aggressive algorithm prioritizing what they think you might find interesting based on the data they've learned about you over who you subscribe to. And so like having 1 million followers on TikTok is not that meaningful, because you're still going to get shown, like just because you follow someone doesn't mean you're going to see their content. Like your behavior is driving more of that. And so the social networks have all kinds of discovery features in there. You can grow an audience there. It's really hard to grow an audience on email because there's zero built-in discovery, right? If you're like, wow, this is the best email that I've read, you have to go somewhere else to share it other than like forwarding it. And even if you forward it to like, a few coworkers or something, they're like, okay, how do I subscribe? Who is this creator? Go to the bottom, or something else. Or like, here's, go to Nathan Barry and like subscribe to his newsletter, right? It's not as easy as just hitting a follow button. And so I think email has had just this steady growth over time, and you can see it, right? The biggest email lists years ago were, like 10,000 people, right? And now the biggest email lists are 2 million. There's a huge difference in audience growth, but it's just been a steady progress over time. And then what happens is people get really excited about something. The hype cycle is basically you get really excited about something that drives discovery. So Twitter threads, TikTok, YouTube, whatever's happening. And then at some point you get jaded by the fact that the algorithm is not working in your favor. And you're like, I want a way to reach these people directly. Because Facebook starts saying, hey, I know you have 100,000 fans for your Facebook page. You can now reach 5,000 of them with each post unless you pay us. And so then you're like, all right, forget Facebook. I want, something that I control much more. And so you end up in this hype cycle between how do I get more discovery and how do I get more direct connection? And that's the cycle that we go in every few years. And email is just steady growth throughout that.
And is it fair to say that for the biggest creators out there, their main objective now is to get you to sign up for their email newsletter? Like that is the final goal. Like they could have millions of followers everywhere, but I feel like I'm seeing everybody's driving everybody back to email now. Is that a fair assessment, or is that just some folks and not everybody?
I think it's becoming a lot more common. I wouldn't say it's everyone. Like if you define creator as a lot of people that we run in similar circles to, then absolutely, right? The James Clears, Ryan Holidays, all of them, they're all in on email. Even like Nick Huber or others, right? Truly understand the value there and push it a lot. If we go broader in with the creator sense, someone who's built 1 million followers on TikTok, or Instagram or YouTube, very few of them are actually using email at this time. You get people like, a good example would be Ali Abdal, who's a doctor in the UK. As he's going through med school, he started making video content about what he was studying and about productivity and study hacks and that sort of thing. And then he ended up building a whole, like a massive YouTube channel. And now he's actually stopped. He's no longer a practicing doctor, and he's all in on YouTube and his 3 million subscriber following. He fully understands the value of email. And so he uses YouTube as his top of the funnel, right? How do I get discovery and more reach? And then he tries to pull as many of them to email as possible. And so I think that's really common with people who understand it. So in our circles, yes, absolutely. But if you go to like pop culture creators, it's still very undiscovered.
And is that because like, if you take a pop culture, I guess you'd call them like an influencer, a celebrity, is there a reason why they don't? Is like what they're offering not really beneficial in an email as opposed to like a Nick Huber sweaty startup? He's more business oriented. He's got things he can sell. Like, why is it that some people are gravitating to it quicker and like maybe a Kim Kardashian wouldn't need a newsletter?
Yeah. Well, I think there's some of what feels hip and exciting. If part of your identity is caught up in being cool, then you want to catch the next wave. And email is just the wave that, like, I don't know how the analogy breaks down. It's still here.
Yeah.
We've got a Kelly Slater like permanent wave here coming, and so it's not interesting from that side. That said, there's some great newsletters. Tim McGraw runs a great newsletter on ConvertKit. Arnold Schwarzenegger just started his second newsletter on ConvertKit. He had one that was very much, life, here's what's going on. And he'd send it once a month. And then now he's got his daily pump email that's going out. And it is blowing up. Like, it's really, really interesting. They're adding like 10,000 subscribers a day to it right now. At least when they're promoting it. And so it's fun to see him like on Jimmy Kimmel or something talking about like, hey, here's my new email newsletter. You should check it out. And people are absolutely loving it. And you can tell that it's written by him because like some of the paragraphs are 3 times longer than they probably should be, but it's fun. It's like, it's his content. And so I think you see these different waves of it, but I don't think email will ever be the trendy thing that everyone's rushing to reserve their usernames on, or like the next Clubhouse or something. It's not going to happen.
You probably know this better than I do, but when I think of why email is so popular, at least from my perspective, is that's I check email. I hate to admit this. I probably check it 20, 30 times a day. And I can't ever foresee a world where I'm not checking email unless we go back to handwritten letters. Like it just seems like can you innovate much more than email in the email world? Like we kind of got what we got. I can't see how that continues to evolve. Is that a fair statement?
I think there's a lot more innovation that could happen. And we're trying to spear some of that. But yeah, I think the thing is that it's a constant in your life. And until that, like if I'm trying to set up if I'm saying like, hey, I'm in your city, let's meet up. I'm doing it over email. I'm trying to pull in more people. And so until that goes away, email is always going to be there at the core because everything else is so fragmented. I was reading a Reddit thread, yesterday. What's not cool anymore? What was cool is not cool anymore.
Yeah.
Facebook was one of the top voted options. And you're like, oh, yep. And so when this constantly shifts, like email is the thing that is continually there.
Yeah, I've gotten off Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. I've gotten back on Snapchat. I mean, the one thing, if I look back over since the beginning of time, is email is the only thing that's been consistent. What is it? Is there anything on the top of your mind that you'd be willing to share of how email could be better that's not obvious to someone like me that just buys real estate?
Well, I think email's biggest problem is discovery. And so that's pretty interesting. There's a company called Sparkloop that we've invested in that is working a lot on like helping creators recommend each other and all of that. Because you want it where you can focus on great content and then that can that can really spread and share. Trying to think of what other things. I think the email reading experience, like newsletters. So if we go with YouTube, for example, and I don't know how deep we want to go into like creator platform algorithms, but YouTube talks about or values watch time. That's the metric that they're paying attention to. And so if you click into a video and you watch 30 seconds of it and you're like, whatever, that wasn't good, then YouTube's like, oh, never mind. Like, show that to fewer people. That wasn't a good hit. But then, if you're watching a lot, then they're like, wow, this channel kept someone on YouTube watching ads and engaging for a long period of time. And you can see a shift in video length that came from watch time being a thing, right? Like a long YouTube video used to be 5 minutes. Now a long YouTube video is 40 minutes. Like imagine, I think when Casey Neistat was doing his vlog, a lot of the episodes were longer and those were like 7 to 10 minutes. And now a long vlog is 40 to 50 minutes because the algorithm is rewarding that. If you can keep someone engaged for that long, then YouTube is like, show this channel to more people. One thing that I think would be interesting is having like a read time analysis for engaging with email, right? If you keep sending me the 5th follow-up to like schedule that meeting, because you're like the ones that I get the private equity emails all the time. And it's like, look, I have not engaged with any emails from this person other than, 3 years ago I said, thanks, but we're not interested. And they continue to follow up. Like just automatically sort that. It's not spam. They're allowed to send me that email, but it's just like, hey, you told me with your behavior that this is not interesting to you. And so I think that whether it's Gmail or the next superhuman or something like that could train a really interesting algorithm around a prioritized inbox based on who I engage with.
And right now, the only metrics that ConvertKit can track are like open rate.
Open and click.
And click.
Deliverability too.
So, what is deliverability?
Basically, did the email server accept the email?
Got it.
And then was it opened? And then what inside the email was clicked on?
But you have no idea like how long they've been reading it or,
Correct. You'd have to be an inbox provider like a Gmail or a Yahoo or something to be able to do something on that side of things. There's a lot of limitations that like email in some ways gets set in stone and does not change. And then if you send an email, you can't change the contents of the email after it's sent, right? That's something that we understand. It no longer lives on your server. And that's been widely accepted. But 2 years ago, we released a feature where, let's say you send out an email and you're like, hey, my book is coming out. Click here to buy it. And you immediately get that reply back and that says like, hey, by the way, link's broken, 404. And you realize like, oh, I put an extra slash in there. And you're like, I just sent that email out to 20,000 people. And, you feel like a total idiot, but you cannot change the email. One thing that we realized that I don't think any other email provider has copied yet. I should get our patents going on it. I don't know if this is patentable. Because that email that link hits our server first, you can change where the link goes. And so in ConvertKit, if you make a mistake, you can go in and edit and say like, oh, the link was supposed to go to nathanbarry.com/book, but I typoed it. And so I can go in and fix that. And that will fix seamlessly. So you end up like with small innovations. I mean, that one feels big if you ever make that mistake. But otherwise, email doesn't change very often because it's decentralized. So like we have a big advantage with it being decentralized because no one can control, like this is the algorithm, you're deplatformed, that sort of thing. But then on the other hand, you can't really innovate because you can't innovate on parts of it because you can't control the protocol that everyone's using.
Yeah, no, I get that. Would you say, I don't even know how to ask this. And when you said, well, like the providers hold all the data like Gmail or Outlook, is there any reason why they would ever want to share that data with you? Or will that always be kind of kept separate? Like, do you think that those email providers love people like you or not? I guess.
Yeah. There's an organization I couldn't even tell you the acronym. It's called MOG, which is a very long acronym that you get into, which is the like official association of all the inbox providers are in there, the major email providers are in there, and it's where you're building relationships with everyone there. So it's everyone talks really well. We're a member of it, and so we have a lot of good relationships with like the people who run compliance at Gmail and that sort of thing. But no, I don't think any big company has any desire to give up their data. We're also at the point, it's interesting as we start to reach data at scale, right? Because we send 2 billion emails a month, which is tiny compared to a MailChimp. But also there's like 800 million email addresses that we've now seen, and we can start to learn interesting things about it, right? Like a lot of what we do is around fighting spam and fraud. Turns out if you don't want to learn about the dark side of the internet, like don't start an email company.
Yeah.
Because, I employ 5 full-time people, almost 10% of my team just on this one problem. But we're able to start to do a lot of things. Like if you import a list, chances are we've seen most of those emails before. So even before you hit send, we know like, we've seen this before. 2/3 of these people, like, looks like scraped lists or whatever. Like we know it's not going to deliver. Or on the other side, we can look at it. Like I'm making this up. I haven't actually looked, right? But if you import your subscriber list, it's probably like, oh, this generally overlaps with some amount of Ryan Holiday, Nick Huber, a bunch of other people who like have some really, really engaged lists on ConvertKit. And so our compliance systems are like, without knowing anything about you, are like, oh, this Chris Powers guy seems like pretty legit because of who's on your list that you're bringing in. So we're starting to have like that data at scale as well.
That's interesting. What is something bad that somebody could do that you guys could detect immediately? Like set up a scam business using ConvertKit, or like what's the dark side of newsletters that might not be obvious?
Yeah. So like a classic one would be ConvertKit offers landing pages, right? It's a helpful service. You have a book coming out, you're starting a newsletter. It's pretty basic. But a common one that we would see people attempt to do every day is like make a Social Security Administration page out of ConvertKit landing pages, and then then email a bunch of people and say like, hey, update your, this is the Social Security Administration, or this is the Census Bureau, like update whatever. And then you're sending to a bunch of scraped emails, and so you're doing like phishing or identity theft at scale. Or another classic one is credit card testing. So you take a whole bunch of credit cards that you bought, maybe you buy 100,000 cards, and then you have to card numbers, and then you have to test which ones can accept a certain level of payment. And so you'd use digital products or that sort of, like, you try to buy small amounts of things, and then the cards that do well, that actually can accept payments, then you're going to load those on physical cards and then pay someone, basically the equivalent of a drug mule or something, to go into the, Apple Store, Louis Vuitton, some type of product that has a really high resale value, and buy those. And then you have that physical product. It can't be charged back on you. And then you're going to sell it. And that's how you're completing your money laundering, or, whatever your scam. So there's like that times 1,000, basically.
Yeah. And that's happening all day, every day.
Yeah. And that's
crazy.
That's how it works. And so sometimes a creator there will be something that a creator doesn't understand, of like, why did this happen? Or why did I get like 10 purchases of my ebook like back to back, and then they were all refunded? And it's like, well, someone used your ebook to test credit cards, and we detected it, shut it down. So yeah, anyway, it's a whole world.
As you analyze data, or as you just look at the creator world, like as we sit here today in 2023, a creator today looks a lot different than a creator in 2012, I guess, when you get started. If I just asked you a loaded question, like, what do the best creators that you know of today do really well, besides the fact that they're already popular and have like huge audiences? Like, what are the tactics that they have put into their days or their business model that are really making them successful?
Yeah. So let's say you already know how to show up consistently. Like there's all this table stakes stuff that you have to do to become successful, of showing up consistently for a long time, continually honing your skills, all of that. So then if we get into the business model side of it, I think the most interesting creators are ones who probably have a range of products to sell. Like we referenced Ryan Holiday earlier. He's pretty interesting with his Daily Stoic business. Because they have digital products that they're selling. They have physical products with these coins that they're doing. They just did a limited edition printing of like a leather-bound copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Like they have this niche and they're just serving it so well. And so the amount of things that you could buy from them, it doesn't feel like they're overly selling. They're just like, people are like, oh, that would be interesting if, and they're like, good idea, and they're providing that. I think another thing that's like a fascinating trend that was not happening, or that I didn't notice 10 years ago, at least, is creators doing things for equity, particularly in their own businesses. But I wrote a blog post on this that I called The $1 Billion Creator. And it's just asking the question of what's the highest ROI place that you could point attention, right? We could point it, I've got 10,000 people on my newsletter. I could point those people to an ad. I could point them to an ebook, anything, right? And these creators who are saying, I'm going to point it to a business that I own all of or some of. So 2 examples on this. One would be a guy named Mark Sisson, who he ran a blog called Mark's Daily Apple. It was, I think, the most popular blog in the paleo diet space, and health and fitness and all of that, back in maybe 2012, 2013. I would guess, from just what I've heard, this isn't verified, that he was making about $1 million a year off of this blog through affiliate links, his own products, all of that. That's an amazing living. He is absolutely killing it. And he was doing it in the early days, and he did this for years. But like, there's no way that you're going to become a billionaire or make hundreds of millions of dollars off of that. But what he did next, what I think is really interesting, and that is he took his audience and he said, okay, what products do they want? And what products do I want? And he decided that he wanted to make a paleo-friendly mayonnaise and a paleo-friendly ketchup. And so he started Primal Kitchen with those 2 products, pretty limited product line, right? And then he can immediately, meet his minimum order quantities because he's got, 100 or 200,000 subscriber email list. He has his brand reputation, all that. So he can launch this product. He's got relationships in the community. And so they can build it up and scale it. Those initial sales let him, start to get retail distribution, because he can also say, like, hey, Whole Foods or whoever, right? Like, test this in one store. Because, and they're like, okay, we'll see how it goes. And then he can geo-target and email, 10,000 people and be like, okay, big favor, please go into Whole Foods and buy, let's sell out of Primal Kitchen mayonnaise. And then that happens, right? And so then he can go back and be like, hey, it seems like we're doing really well in Austin. How about we try San Antonio, and you work your way up from there. So the punchline of the story is that I think it only took 3, maybe 4 years, and he sold Primal Kitchen to Kraft for $200 million. And so when you're asking, what's the highest ROI of where you could point an audience, something you own equity in, I keep thinking of other quick ones. Ryan Reynolds is absolutely killing this playbook, doing so well with it. Because like, who knows what it costs? Maybe years ago, you're like, Ryan, I'll pay you $1 million to be the face of this commercial or whatever. And somewhere in there, he was like, yes. Somewhere he goes, no, I want to own the company that I'm, the face of. I want the upside of what's happening. And so he did that, buying into Mint Mobile, Aviation Gin. And he's like, look, I'm going to promote all my own things. and get the full upside of it. I think another example, Mr. Beast, even if we take it, like bring it back into the real estate Twitter community, right? Like a lot of these guys, anyone raising a fund, if you are demonstrating that you're really smart at what you're doing, and all of that over time, then you're having people who are like, oh, I never would have heard of you before because they're not in your market or whatever else, but you seem to be a great capital allocator. Like, can I put $1 million into your fund? And these people might have 5,000 followers on Twitter. And so their revenue per follower would be, if you graphed that way, would be completely off the charts because they got the right people. And so it's like, should they be taking a sponsored post from whoever? Maybe, maybe not. But the highest return on investment for that, like where you focus your audience, could be orders of magnitude bigger than whatever someone else is saying it is.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, just, what's the podcast for you? It's a lot of things, but one of it is building trust at scale. I mean, if you listen to enough of my episodes, I can't fake who I am. Maybe in one episode I could, but if you listen to 5, it's like, okay, this is kind of who I'm dealing with. And it's interesting as you bring up like the fund business, because money raising's always been, in these closed circles for a lot of history. And now I get people that I've known forever like, well, you just raise a bunch of money because of your podcast now. And I'm like, you're saying that like it's a bad thing, but 2, you're saying it like you're probably not going to be doing it in 5 years too. I mean, as I think about where we're headed in the world, like people would rather have a Mr. Beast burger than a Burger King or Primal Foods or whatever it's called instead of Heinz Kraft ketchup or whatever. And so as I think about like where the creator world's headed, maybe we can push the conversation there a little bit, is like, what are the really interesting things on the horizon? Because in a lot of ways you could say we're just kind of scratching the surface and what creators are going to be able to do. The legacy media is starting to take a backseat to podcasting. People, like you said, Ryan Reynolds is buying sports teams and starting all these companies, and he probably didn't have a business degree. Mr. Beast make YouTube videos, and now he's one of the wealthiest people in the world. As you think about like, what are the things that people will start doing more of and what they'll be doing less of as we move forward, like what comes to mind?
Well, I think the first thing is that people often see the examples in the famous examples, right? Mr. Beast, Ryan Reynolds, that kind of thing. And what I think is really interesting is bringing those home, right? Because you and I are not trying to be, have no intention to be. And even if we were, like, it's never going to happen of being the next Mr. Beast. All right. That's not the angle that we're going. And so it's pretty easy to think like, oh, that doesn't, like, that is interesting or novel, but it doesn't apply to us. But then you get something like, like a mutual friend of ours, Levi James, shared on Twitter something like how he'd raised, I don't know, $75 million, something crazy from LPs through Twitter. Right? You bring that really close to home and it's like, oh, that is our world. That is, how that works. And so I think we're going to see a lot more examples of people learning some of the lessons from someone who's crazy famous and then applying it to like a very specific business that doesn't seem like it applies. Another example might be like Mitchell Baldrich, who is a fantastic CPA. I know him originally through his content. And then, we get to know each other. We're doing a project together now, right? Because there's things that he can help ConvertKit out on. And it's all, he's doing this creator playbook, but he's building, a services business based off of it. And it's going to work really, really well. So I think if in the past there was creator businesses and regular businesses, and those were 2 different worlds, and creator businesses are like influencers, ads, that kind of thing. And regular business is everything else. I think the biggest trend you're going to see is those just totally merging. And there won't be very many businesses left that don't have like the top people in them using the creator playbook. Because like you can apply it basically off of every industry. Even if you took something totally different, like mention my uncle who's a doctor, let's go something like a specialty surgery. Or even maybe something you're shopping for, like a cosmetic surgery of some kind, right? Like you would start to trust the person who's talking about it and has built a reputation in this space. And you're like, do I want to go to someone random, or do I want to go to this person who has built the whole reputation in this space? And you're like, I'm going for that person all the time. And so I think you're going to just see that apply to every different industry. And then the other thing is, you're going to see more and more creators move from not, can I get paid $5,000 for this promotion, but what equity can I get? And then more interestingly is, can I start the business? I have the audience. What business should I start? Because there's just so many high value, there's all kinds of different multiples in different businesses. It's like, how can I bring this attention into something that will pay me a higher multiple, or the value of it will compound over time. And that's effectively what I did with ConvertKit, right? Where I decided I couldn't articulate back then that this was the path that I was following. But it turns out building an audience and pointing it to growing a software company is way more valuable than, pointing that audience to content about how to design software. One of them has recurring revenue, massive multiples, all of that. And the other, is a great cash flow and income stream, but not like a long-term business.
Yeah. The smallest example of them all is I've been following you. We become friends online. I follow your newsletter, and it took a couple of years. And now when it was time to start a newsletter, it was like, oh, this is where I'm going to start it. It wasn't even a thought. And a lot of it was, even though we hadn't met in person, I was like, I feel like I would be cheating on him if I went anywhere else. But yes. I think that's how a lot of people feel about a lot of products, because you get to know somebody who's not sitting here saying like, I'm the reason, I'm the guy, it's all about me. It's more like, I'm here providing value to the world. And oh, by the way, I have this thing. And if you have found value in what I have, maybe you'll found value in this. And it starts to compound. And, my podcast isn't big by any stretch of the imagination compared to some, but already seeing the early signs of folks that are like, hey, will you invest with us? Can we do an episode with you? We have this business. We'd love to be on the podcast. And like, I don't know how that'll all flush out, but as I see the early signs of these conversations, I can only sit here and go, man, if I 10X this thing over the next 5 years, if they're already starting now, I can't imagine what the opportunities become down the road. And it's really exciting.
Well, and especially as that compounds, because what you're going to find is, let's say if you have your first 100 listeners, maybe 5 of them or 10 of them are really high value. Like it's a smaller percentage. But then as it builds up, you're going to get this reputation with people who, are the kinds of people that you want to reach, who are like, their equivalent might be, like on one hand, it's like, oh, I'd be feeling like I'm cheating on Nathan if I signed up for a different email product than ConvertKit. It could be like, okay, I'm looking to figure out the next funds that I'm investing in. And I've been listening to Chris forever. And like, oh, I need to try to see if I can invest in one of his next deals, or, like that could apply all across the board. And so just that level, I think it applies to basically every business.
You think we'll ever have like a Grammy or an Emmy Awards for creators? Because Hollywood's always controlled who's famous and who's not. That's not the case anymore. I would argue the people that everybody thinks are famous in Hollywood are their stock values dropping quicker as like a Mr. Beast is rising. Is there ever a world where like we honor the creators and we build a world around them? Or is it good that they kind of maintain independent and they're not controlled by any one entity or thing? That's kind of a decentralized deal, whereas Hollywood is very centralized.
It'll definitely come over time. There's still a long ways to go. Like, and there's so many different kinds of creators. So like, are you doing this just for podcasts? Like, I think it's Podcast Movement does have podcast awards, right? But we're still like at such a tiny scale. There's book author awards. All right. Things are in these different niches. Another thing that happens is like the level of name recognition versus face recognition is interesting. So I've run a conference for a few years and we've had a lot of people out to speak. One year we had Casey Neistat out to speak. He's walking through the Boise airport, and this is Boise. right? And he's already got people being like, Casey, all of that. The next year we had Mark Manson, who has sold an insane number of copies of his books and all that. And Mark he was speaking on the second day at the end, and he attended the entire conference. And I think some people knew who he was, but after he got on stage, tons of people want to talk to him afterwards. But he was there in the audience like the whole time, and this guy sold tens of millions of books. But he chose a medium where his face isn't recognizable. And so he shows up on video podcasts or whatever else, but you don't read his book and know, oh, that's what it looks like. Whereas Casey Neistat, if you engage with him, like 99% chance through his YouTube videos. And so what he looks like. So I think as we talk about fame, it's a really interesting thing. I was talking to a friend who does a lot of work in Hollywood, and she and I were headed to the same conference. And she was like, yeah, it's a bunch of founders. She was telling him it's a bunch of founders, really wealthy, successful, all of that, and he goes, wait, so they're rich and not famous? Damn, that must be nice.
Yeah,
they can go to the grocery store and
blend in.
No hat and sunglasses. And so I think what's going to be interesting is as a creator, you can decide in what forms you want to be famous. If you're like, look, I want to be known for my content and I never want to get recognized on the street, perfect. Stick to writing and Twitter. If you're like, hey, I want that attention. I want to show up to a VidCon or something and have 1,000 people trying to see me, then YouTube is your thing. Personally, what I want is I want to be famous enough that when I reach out to someone, they want to take the call or the email, but not so famous that I ever get recognized on the street.
That is a perfect amount of fame. You said recently in a tweet, one of the greatest creators that you're watching right now grow is somebody that maybe a lot of folks on this podcast will know of, is Sahil Bloom. What's he doing so well? If you had to give your synopsis of why he has emerged in the last couple of years and really he's built a hell of a brand. What's he doing differently than others?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. So I think of Sahil, hopefully this is a fair characterization. I think of him as the next James Clear. And I've had a front row seat to both of them building their brands. James and I have been friends since before he launched his evenjamesclear.com. So there's a lot of parallels in what they're doing. The first thing, if we go with Sahil, he chose one platform and stuck with it relentlessly. And so a lot of people are saying yeah, I've got Twitter going, I've got my blog. And then they hear an interview with someone who's doing really well on YouTube and they're like, okay, I guess I got to launch YouTube. And they hear an interview with someone who's doing well on TikTok. And I'm like, okay, how do we turn that into clips? And we'll go on TikTok. And so that is not a winning strategy. I would find one platform that has really good built-in distribution. And that algorithm is made for discovery. And I would go in on that and I would basically ignore everything else. And I'd have a funnel back to email. Sahil did that really, really well, and he's from going from nothing to, I don't know what he's at, 750,000, 800,000 followers on Twitter in 2.5, 3 years. He started when we all got locked inside for COVID. That's when Sahil started on Twitter. So that's the first thing. Focus on one channel. He has since expanded, but he got his growth engine dialed in on Twitter first. The second thing is the quality of his content is really, really good. And the thing that he's nailed is high quality content consistently. And a lot of people can do one or the other. And so he's basically made it his full-time job to create, this quality of content. And that's gone really well. Kind of the next thing that he did is focused really deliberately on his newsletter and growing that. And so he's now you see him trying out a lot of things that are kind of tried and true ways to grow your newsletter. He's just doing it with a much bigger audience at this point, on Twitter. So for example, something that we've done from the early days is writing a guide or an ebook on something specific in your industry. So it's a 20 to 40 page book, worksheet, resource, something that's like really detailed, goes behind the scenes, and giving that away. And I watched Sahil add 20,000 subscribers in 3 days or something, by really heavily promoting his how to do an annual review guide. And it was really good. Right. But then he was able to go to these relationships that he built and say, hey, will you promote this? Will you share it? And amplify it himself on Twitter. So that's really impressive. He's also, he's working on a book right now. I'm not sure how much he's talked about publicly, but you just see him relentlessly saying, okay, sign the book deal. And now we have a release date. And he is just pursuing, how do I get the email list absolutely as big as possible between now and then? And so he's very, very focused. And you can't distract that man if you tried. If you're like, hey, will you do this? He's just does it help me grow the audience for the book launch? I think the other thing that's interesting is he's going on a pre-book tour in India. And so he's realized that he's grown a good part of his audience in India. And so he's like, okay, now I'm flying to India and I'm going to appear in person on as many large podcasts in India as possible. And I think a lot of us are just in our circles. And if you told me hey, by the way, you have a huge audience in, I don't know, Australia or something, I'd be like, okay, that's neat.
Hello, mate.
And he's immediately okay, how can I capitalize on this? And India happens to have, one of the world's largest populations. And so he's saying hey, I can actually build a much larger audience, potentially in India than even in the US. And so I think that's fascinating. So there's a lot of things, but basically that playbook and the relentless execution is the biggest thing.
You wrote a tweet the other day. You said something would you rather have 50,000 followers on Twitter or 5,000 newsletter subscribers? I think I know that it was maybe not a trick question, but the answer is 5,000 newsletter subscribers, or is that right or wrong?
I think it depends.
Okay.
I'd like to throw out these little questions, and when I write it out, I play with the numbers to the point where it doesn't feel obvious. And if everybody goes one way, I'm like, shoot, that was, I didn't get the ratio right. I had one, I can't remember if it was TikTok to Instagram, TikTok. I can't remember what I compared, but one of them, people were like, no, the ratio is 50 to 1, or 100 to 1, because TikTok followers just aren't worth that much. Twitter, that the ratio is probably 10 to 1 for me. Somewhere in there, 5 to 1. I think it's, I ultimately want email subscribers. That's what I care about, because I know I can drive sales and action from there. So if I'm trying to, let's see, what are the options? I'm, trying to sell a book. I have a book come out and I want you to write reviews on Amazon. We have a new ConvertKit feature and I want you to upvote it on Product Hunt. I can drive action for a lot of people from an email list. Or going back to the Primal Kitchen example, right? If I don't know that Mark Sisson did this, I would do it if I was him, of we're first in Whole Foods and I need this to be a win. I can tweet to everyone and be like, hey, if you happen to live in Austin, could you go and, or I can just be like, hey, I know that 500 of you live here. I need you to go do this thing. And I can make it look super personal and be like, hey, Chris, we're in the Fort Worth stores now. Could you
Nathan's here.
Right. And so you can do those things. And I've done it so many times of I'm in LA for a conference and I'm throw together a meetup and I write a super personal seeming email to the 200 people on my list who are in the LA area. So that converts really well.
And it's opposed to going on Twitter and just saying, hey, even though you have 105,000 people on Twitter, or however many you have, you say, I'm going to be in LA. That just doesn't. Is it how we consume information as consumers? Why would that not be as effective as reading it in an email?
Well, what's the chance that you receive that message?
Okay, that's what I figured. There's a high probability you never see it.
Yep, and so it's a targeted message. I need a certain group of people to do a certain thing. Now, if I'm trying to get anyone to broadly amplify this idea, then Twitter is fantastic for that. probably better than email. Because email, you could like and favorite my email all day long. It doesn't do anything for me other than an eco boost. But if you're like replying and engaging with content or retweeting on Twitter or whatever else, then like more people are going to find it and discover that. And so it's basically, if I want to reach more new people, I'm focusing on a platform like Twitter that has built-in distribution. And if I'm trying to drive an action or build more engagement, I'm focusing on something like email or a podcast. Podcast has a lot of the pros and cons that a lot of similar ones that email does.
Would somebody like Elon Musk that has 130 million Twitter followers, would he benefit from a newsletter on ConvertKit?
I think so. Because the other thing that you can do, I don't know if I should compare Nick Huber and Elon Musk.
Nick will love this. His ego is already inflating as he's listening.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yes. But like Nick does a really good, entertaining job of, like, he has these top of funnel tweets, right? Where he's saying things that get all of this attention, right? And get all of this hate and everything else. Elon has the same problem, right? He puts something out there, gets all this attention. Oh, Elon's the best. Elon's the worst, right? All of this. And as you move down the funnel, in Nick's case, right, you're getting into some business focused content. People engage with that. And then you move down, like you get way down the funnel and you're like, here's how to do cost segregation, cash out, refi, blah, 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 blah. Right. And that's for a very specific group of people. Twitter's okay at that. Email's really, really good at that. Right. And so I think for Elon Musk, it'd be interesting if he had the same, what are the things that he really cares about that aren't the sound bites that he's throwing out there because he thinks it's entertaining to make this joke, or he actually likes it when people misinterpret him or bash on him in whatever way. I think it'd be fascinating if he was like, hey, this is what I care about. This is like the thoughtful version of it. This is what I want you to take action on. I think it'd be very, very valuable. I don't know that it'll ever happen, but I like seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger is probably the best example of this. Right? He can be entertaining and he can do all kinds of things, but often there's things that he really wants you to do. Like a cause that he cares very deeply about is gerrymandering, and how like districts are getting, voting districts are redrawn to achieve like very specific outcomes in a two-party system. And so if you're like, hey, this is like districts are getting redrawn in this section of your state, like next week, he can talk about it at a global level, but on email, he could go, for the 20,000 people in Texas, like on my list, this is what's happening right now. Would you be interested in taking action on it? And so it's a much more thoughtful medium, and I hope more people play with it.
Well, you can't really fake it. Like what we learned maybe through the Twitter files or whatever is like you can have a lot of bots on social media that inflate follower counts that make people look like they have more clout, aka politicians or whatever. But a politician can't really fake an email because you either unsubscribe immediately because you weren't part of it. Like you can't be fooled by it. Or can you be fooled in email in any way besides not necessarily illegal stuff like credit card scams, but just clout wise?
Well, you could, like, people will gradually engage with your emails less and less, right? Something that I was interested in today, I might not be interested in 3 years from now, but I might not unsubscribe. And so you would see that in your open rates and stats over time. And so like cleaning your list is important for a lot of reasons, but one of them is, there's no point in having 100,000 subscriber email list if only 10,000 are reading your stuff. And so then we would say like, okay, it's time to go clear out those lists and clean things up. Really the only value would be if you're trying to sell a book deal and you're like, I have 100,000 subscribers on my email list. And years ago, I don't think they knew enough to ask like, oh, cool, what's the open rate? Now I think they know to ask, And so then they'd be like, oh, what's the average open rate on email? And if you're like 40% or 30%, they'd be like, this is amazing. This is a great community. And if you're like 5%, then they're like, okay, we'll file that away along with, it's equal to maybe what you have on social platforms.
What is like the best of the best open rate?
On a large email list at scale, like it's rare to see over 50%. Anything over 40% is really, really good. There are some of these people who run multi-million subscriber email lists who are averaging 40 to 50%, and doing it at that size of audience is very, very impressive.
Yeah. And are most of those type of email lists behind a paywall, or are they open to anybody? Like, is it
Mostly,
higher engagement if they pay?
Generally, yes, because it's like you had to overcome that barrier to get on the list. It's really the quality of the content. Yeah, paid email is a whole other thing that's interesting. I personally believe that like paid email newsletters can be a challenging business model if you're not a professional writer, because otherwise you created a product for yourself that makes you have to show up every single week for it, and the churn can be really high and all of that. And so I like things like, one of my favorite email products is if people do a paid email course where it's a one-time payment and then it's timed emails. So it's like, hey, I'm going to teach you about design or real estate investing or whatever other thing. And I'm doing it in this automated series that, if I sign up today and you sign up next week, we get the emails timed to ourselves or timed to our own subscription date. And that's a format that's really easy to create. If later you're like, oh, email 4 could be better in this way, you just go and edit it. It's not like an ebook where you're like, got to remember to tell the designer to make these updates and then get it back and send out a new version. And so I really like that version, because I never want to sign myself up for a content treadmill of basically feeling like this thing that I love to do and was thrilled I got paid for. Now I have to do it. I think it's different if your career is as a journalist and you're like, look, I'm used to writing 3 articles a day, and you're saying I only have to write 2 a week, and I get, that's fantastic. But most of us aren't professional journalists who have that muscle developed.
Let's talk about that for just a little bit. You kind of have an inside view into this, like the legacy media versus the world of ConvertKit. When you see the earnings that creators have as compared to being a journalist at a huge corporation with all this overhead and, thing, like what, if we talked about the next 10 years there, I mean, we're starting to see what's happening, but what is keeping some of the greatest journalists from just going right to themselves and starting to do their own stuff? Is it access to everything they get in the spin room of a big company? Or like, I feel like we're at a tipping point. I know as a consumer, I would trust maybe your newsletter more than ConvertKit Corporation news, whatever. It's like, I want to hear straight from the source. So how do you think about that as we go forward, as it relates to pure professional journalism, staying in the main media or creating their own brands and becoming their own creators?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of people build their experience and their byline with a major brand. Right? Because do I want to start totally from scratch and like try to convince you why I'm interesting or all of that at a time when I myself have not built the skills? Because a lot of people are like, why don't you just do this on your own? It's like, look, I don't have the skills yet to show up consistently to be a great, like I haven't spent 10 years with some of the best editors in the world being like, no, not that, like this, and gradually learning. And I think we often downplay the craft and the amount of time that it takes, because we see these examples of like something hitting and going viral. And it's like, oh, now go do your own thing. It's like, look, you really don't have any more skills today than you did yesterday before you went viral. And so I think people building and honing those skills, whether it's writing or design or investing or anything else, I think that's one thing. And then you build up the credibility, right? You're going to see a lot of people's bylines or bios where they're talking about like, I was a reporter here. I wrote for Vox for this period of time, or, The Atlantic, whatever else, right? And that lends credibility as you're like, oh, even if it's just a small way, as you're saying, should I follow this person or not? And then once you reach a certain level of you feel like you have your skills honed and enough credibility, then you have those 2 options of like, should I do this in-house or should I go and start my own business? And I think a lot of people are like, well, it's a newsletter. It's not a business. And it's like, it is a business. And so you have to make sure that that's what you want. And a lot of people copywriting, driving sales, all of these, like, they're real skills that you have to hone and learn. How to do a product launch, how to get people to actually pay for, like, pricing and packaging. All of these things are skills that have to be learned. And if you don't want to go down that path, then I think it's a very compelling thing to say, like, oh, I'm just going to stay at this news organization where I just have to worry about writing, or where I have the support of great editors or everything else. Because otherwise you're assembling it for the most part on your own.
This is kind of a weird question. Well, it's not totally weird, but you're kind of like the Spotify for newsletters. You provide a platform for artists to get their content out. As I think of, like, Joe Rogan, the pressure that Spotify got as Joe Rogan was just doing his thing. And then there was this pressure on Spotify, like, you going to keep him or you not? Have you ever run into that where, like, maybe somebody on your platform's writing and you're getting pressure to, like, censor them or take them down?
Yeah, we definitely have. Not as often as, like, a Spotify or a Substack or something that's like, we're more behind the scenes. You might read, like, if you read James Clear's newsletter, you'd have to be paying attention to know that it's powered by ConvertKit, right? Whereas if you read someone on Substack, right, it's in the domain, it's in the footer, like, you're seeing it all over the place. And so there's less of, like, oh, ConvertKit, supports whatever. We have had it where, there have been some hot topic, like, people who are in the news playing in that space. Thankfully, they've either been fairly clearly, like, inside our acceptable use policy, and we're just like, no. Or actually, the most common is don't respond, right? When people try to start something, just, like, don't give it any oxygen. So we look closely and see, like, are they within our acceptable use policy? Yes or no? And then try to say as little publicly as possible, because most everything will just die out. And then thankfully, the ones that have been high profile and outside of our acceptable use policy have been firmly outside of it.
Yeah.
And so then, like, that made it pretty cut and dry. Like, there's one political, I don't know, character, we'll go with that, who, like, their content was technically within our acceptable use policy, but their engagement rates were terrible. Their email list hygiene was terrible. Like, they were driving bounces and everything else. And so we avoided all of that. Like, it was just clear they were not a good fit for the platform. And so we banned them. We didn't agree with them politically and all of that, but it was very, very clear that they would, harm the deliverability reputation of the platform if we let them continue. And
is it your deal? Like, because again, even with Twitter, is like, you become the mayor of ConvertKit. Like, at the end of the day, the buck stops with your rule, but I'm assuming you don't want to be the arbitrar of free speech or this or that. And so is the playbook just like, write a set of guidelines and this is what we're going to stick to. And if it sticks in there, good. If not, just try and create as little gray area as possible.
Yeah. And we have a team inside, like a little council that, like, evaluates all of these. And it's our most, like, I was going to say black and white, and that's not the right way to think about it. But the people who are just like, yeah, that content, I don't like it or I don't agree with it, but here's our guidelines, here's our principles. And like, the people who are much more likely to get involved in something, like emotionally invested in something, those people are not on the content moderation council. Because it's just like, you can't. It's like, that's not our place on the internet. The other thing is, I think your role in moderation is a lot more important if you're running, like, discovery algorithms. If you're deciding, should this get put in front of more people?
Yeah.
ConvertKit's not doing that.
Yeah.
Right. We're at the point where we're saying, if you come to us with your very edgy real estate newsletter, it's like, look, they signed up to hear from you. You brought them in. And that's a lot different than if we were, like, taking someone's questionable content and showing it in the algorithm to a bunch of other people.
It's interesting. I'll ask you one more question. You can answer it or you don't have to. And I assume, like, when I hear, like, if I go back to the Joe Rogan case and it's like, all these people are calling Spotify to get him canceled. And part of me is like, maybe nobody's calling him. And that's just what we're being told to just kind of get us all. But I guess from my opinion, when somebody's wanting somebody to take something down, from your perspective, is it usually like a reader of it? Is it the government? Like, who are the people that want stuff taken down?
If you post something popular on Twitter, say it's going to get 1 million or 2 million impressions, something like that. It's going to go through 3 distinct phases. And you'll notice this in the replies. The first is your actual follower, like your engaged followers. They're going to be like, this is great, or they'll challenge you on it, and they'll do it from like you can just tell that they care, they're invested, all that. It's thoughtful. The next wave out from that is like people who follow your followers. They saw it because of a reply, a retweet, something like that. And they might question some more of it or argue a little bit, but like it'll still be thoughtful discourse. And then probably about the 3rd day, as something spreads and keeps going, then you'll get to the people who have no idea who you are or who the person is who've engaged with it so that ultimately ended up on their feed. And those people are just like, you're an idiot. This is nonsense. Like, we'll just absolutely tear it apart. And they have no connection whatsoever to you as a creator. And they just saw it in passing by and decided, this is the thing that I'm going to be offended about today. And I think that almost all of the, like, take down this content, let's get a bunch of people together, it's all that third, like that outside tier. And it's very, very rarely someone who's been like, look, I've been reading your newsletter, following your Twitter, listening to your podcast for a few months, and like, you shouldn't have said that, or that was hateful, or whatever else. Because those people usually understand nuance. And that's why when you see someone's entire audience turn against them, then it's like, okay, that was probably really bad. But most of the time, the mob is that third layer.
All right, last one. You've been generous. We are in like a 30-day hysteria of Chat GPT. AI is resurfacing as like 2023 is the year of AI. How will things like Chat GPT, and we don't even have to answer that part, just one of the questions that came in from Twitter is your point of view on how AI impacts creators, as we go forward.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to look at what maybe backing up. There was a wave of startups in like 2018 to 2019 timeframe. They were all like AI, machine learning, all of this. And it was the buzzword that people were slapping on their company to try to raise a bunch more money. That was mostly nonsense. Because it wasn't providing them a distinct advantage in the experience they created for consumers. This wave of AI, I think, is fundamentally different. That what's available now is remarkably better, and will change a lot of things. So I think about it from the perspective of a writer. I like to think, if I'm writing something, could this be written by Chat GPT? So if I'm like 10 ways to do X, right? And you plug it in, and like Chat GPT is like, oh, like there's a whole thread, then you're like, all right, so this is going to become like, it was already commoditized and now it's going to become obnoxious. And so as a content creator, what are the things that I can create that AI can't do now, maybe even for 5 years or more? That's like tell stories from personal experience, connect very separate ideas that, you wouldn't think go together, like deep research on things, all of that. And so I love that. I don't always hit this benchmark because sometimes I'm like, oh, I like this is good enough, I want to get it out. But I like to think about that as, could this be written by AI? If yes, don't post, because it's not interesting or engaging enough. I think that there's a really interesting angle in like augmenting you as a creator with AI. So simple things like getting summaries of YouTube videos. You might not watch the whole thing, but it's like, here's a transcript, then summarized by ChatGPT, right? Or there's a really cool tool called lex.page, which is by Nathan Baschez and Dan Schipper over at Every. And it has this feature, as you're writing, if you just hit plus, 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 then it suggests using GPT-3 what you should write next. So if you're like, I'm stuck, like, give me a conclusion, then it will. And I think that's really interesting, of like overcoming writer's block, or like trying different phrasings of things. So you'll see more of that. And then I think the last thing that's going to be interesting is like just who has the best data sets. Because ultimately it seems like all of these models are going to be widely available, at least with OpenAI, and I think other companies will follow. And so then it's like, okay, who has the best data to train this on? Because right now we're all playing with, content, but like Apple with their Apple Watch, I'm gonna bet on their health AI stuff being pretty dang good.
Yeah.
I would not bet against that, because I think they have the absolute best data.
Yep. And
so we think about it from the ConvertKit side. What data do we have that's useful? Is there a way that we can do this? It's not like just slapping AI on in the same way as someone else might, but how could we actually do something useful with the data that we have?
Yeah.
To give you as the creator some insights. And I don't have any solutions there yet, but that's how I think about it.
I love it. All right, man. This has been awesome. Thank you very much for today. This was great.
Thanks for having me.
As we sat back years ago and were envisioning where Fort was going to go, we realized we needed to bring in a global workforce, a remote workforce that could work with us. And a few of the reasons why were obviously cost, which I think is the first thing that comes to everybody's mind. But then when we talk about shifts, a 24-hour shift, and maybe you can go a little further there, and some of the other benefits that we've realized as we've gone on. And now we sit here today in 2022. At the time we first had this was maybe 10 employees. Now we're at 46. Mm-hmm. And as you think about the next chapter and how we're scaling, it's almost inconceivable that we would do it without Relay Human Cloud. So can you just talk a little bit more to how the shifts work at Fort and the productivity and some of the other benefits that we've learned about working with a global workforce?
It's actually been pretty transformational from how we think about how we're going to not only get stuff done today, but how we're going to get stuff done in the future as we grow. And so when you start going down that path of thinking about you're going to start working with people on the other side of the world, right? There's a lot of questions that come up. How are we going to do it? How are we going to train them? How are we going to manage them? Who's managing them? All those things come up. What we found with Relay Human Cloud was that all those thoughts had already been taken care of, and that we could focus on what type of talent is there that can join our team. Does it fit our need? And once we saw that all that thought and energy had already been put into the operational part of managing and running a team, and the thing that we focus on here locally, then it was just a matter of finding the talent. And what I think that Relay Human Cloud has done really well is find a lot of great talent. And, these are people that are highly educated, that can provide a ton of value to a company like ours that otherwise we can't find here. And obviously it's at a high or a extreme cost savings compared to what we could find here. So what we started looking for was how could we supplement what we currently do with the team overseas. And it started off for us from an accounting perspective. We have a lot of these things that are repetitive, task-driven, that just never end. And we knew that our team was taking on a lot of work during the day, which was limiting our ability to take on new properties. And so we have a choice. We can hire another accountant or another staff accountant, or promote somebody and bring that person on. But we're really just trying to solve, at first, a repetitive task. So when we reached out to Relay Human Cloud, we discovered that not only could we solve that problem, we could get a very qualified person that could not only do that, help support on a lot of other things. And so very quickly it turned into we're trying to solve some repetitive tasks to bringing on more and more team members that were actually helping us grow our accounting department without having to bring on a lot of people here. And so that just continued to grow. So since then, we've brought on additional assistants, but it started with accounting. The benefit of having a team working globally is that you get the benefit of around the clock, and it never ends. And so because we have a team here working on things, obviously the time runs out during the day, but there's things that they're gonna come into work tomorrow and they're gonna have to start doing that again. One of those things is, and a good example is cash reconciliations of every bank account. At Fort Capital, we have 50 bank accounts and there's cash reconciliations that have to happen every day. Well, that was something that locally a team had to come into work and start working on every day. Well, that just means there's other things they can't start working on. What happened immediately with our team at Relay Human Cloud was that overnight they were processing all those. They were doing all that accounting work on the back end so that when our team showed up in the morning, they could start on more important tasks that were happening locally directly related to the property. And that allowed us to create efficiencies. And so that's just one benefit. We can go through an entire list of things that we have discovered that overnight can be done to help increase the efficiency of the accounting team. That extends beyond the accounting team. It also extends to the property management team, processing invoices.
Whether you're a small business, medium-sized business, large business, and you're looking to expand your team and build a global workforce, go to relayhumancloud.com, use the promo code TheFortPod, that's TheFortPod, and they have been generous enough to offer $500 off for every employee that you hire per year.
Fort Capital, we have millions of square feet of industrial space across the country. And with that, you have a lot of invoicing that's happening at all times. You could name a million things, whether it's paying bills, contractors, tenants, whatever it is. There's a million invoices and that can all be processed in India overnight, so that when our team comes in, they're not spending their day processing invoices, which allows us to get to more proactive accounting measures so that we're using our accounting team to actually push the company forward, not keep up with what's coming at us, right? And so we found a ton of efficiencies by having the 24-hour workday.
So following that up, it was also important to us because that could have been done anywhere, but we wanted it happening under one roof with people that we knew, that we worked with daily, that were part of our team. And so as you think about these people that are halfway across the globe, it still doesn't seem like it seems like they're in the next room over.
Right. And that's a good point. And I think what's important to understand there is that this group of individuals that are working in India are working directly for our team. They are a part of our team. They're in our systems. They communicate with our team every day. They are not just an extension of our team, they are a part of our team. And so it is much, much different than if you go hire a third-party service out there in the world that you're asking to process invoices, who you're having to send critical or important data to that is, or might be sensitive, right? Information. We actually have all that internal, and this team is a part of that internal team. And so it's a much different way to look at outsourcing than if you're just outsourcing it, even here locally in America. There's a risk there that you're sending your data to somewhere else. This is all happening internally.